I know we talked about these guys at the top of the podcast, but you brought to my attention before we went live that Jake Fisher had a report on his Substack
Yep.
that Naz Reid, Myles Turner, and Santi Aldama are on the Detroit Pistons radar. I talked about Naz Reid and Myles Turner last week because that came from Mark Stein. Santi Aldama is actually a brand new name to this list. Let's talk about Santi first, and then we can kind of circle back to Naz and Myles. I know he's a younger guy. Memphis probably had his best season with the Grizzlies. When you look at a guy like a Santi, one, do you think it would be an ideal fit for the Pistons? And two, what do you think possibly a contract like that could be? Because he is a RFA, so the Grizzlies could match any offer.
Yeah, I certainly think it makes a lot of sense to have a Santi Aldama type player on their radar, especially if they aren't able to go out and get like a Naz Reid or a Myles Turner. He's someone that, you know, when you talk about the ability to have someone who's big, who can stretch the floor, who can play defense, who does all the little things that you want a player to do, he certainly fits that mold and makes a lot of sense. When you're a player that's that young and has shown that type of improvement and has that skill set, it's very easy for him to start approaching like the 15, 20, plus $1 million a year mark. So the thing that's going to be difficult is if the Pistons are going to want to make that type of move for Santi Aldama, they're either going to have to like do some form of sign and trade to get the Grizzlies to buy into making that move, or they're going to have to offer a high amount that makes Memphis trepidatious to match said offer. So that's where it gets tricky to me. I personally, like, if you're able to bring him in at like 15 or 17 a year and you make some form of sign and trade where you send like some cap relief or something in return, I think that's something that would make a lot of sense. It's just once you start getting up, kind of like up to those numbers, you just want to make sure that what you're getting is a proven commodity. And he's probably the biggest flyer of the three, between Turner, Reid, and Aldama. But I mean, I certainly get why he's on this list because he definitely fits the mold of what the Pistons need to kind of take that next step, so to speak. So yeah, definitely interesting to see his name floated in there. And Jake Fisher, if it's coming from the Steinline Substack, it's probably true.
Yeah, I saw the report last week and I talked on it briefly, which I don't know if you remember when we did the Pistons roundtable, and I mentioned Myles Turner like really early on, and I was like, Myles Turner would be like ideal for the Pistons.
Yep.
I didn't see the Pacers making the finals. I thought because they were struggling at that time. I don't even think they weren't even a play-in team, if I remember correctly. They were like maybe an 11 seed. They were really struggling. I was like,
they were under 500 at Christmas.
Yeah, which is wild to even
think
about.
Yeah, since January 1st, they have the second best record in the league, only to the Thunder.
That's insane. It's truly insane where they can just kind of coast and just turn on the switch.
Well, because it was really health that was kind of their issue, to start, and just Hallie just had this weird shooting slump coming out. So like it's their season's almost like it's almost kind of like how they are in games where they just turn like they flip a switch in the second half and become this completely different team. That's kind of what they did in the entirety of the season, if you think about it.
Yeah, it's wild to think about because I remember mentioning Myles, but I will say out of the three names, I think he's probably the one that's the most unrealistic.
Yeah.
Just because, like, if you truly want to make room for Myles, you're either trading Tobias or you're trading Stu. You're not touching Cade because Cade's the franchise guy, but just to make the money work, those are the two contracts that you would have to try to lure, maybe some draft capital now that you can trade first round picks. But I think Myles, to me, depending on how the finals go, Sean, I think he could get $30 million a year. I really do.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like, if I'm Indiana, I'm not letting that guy walk this summer based on how things are going. Like, especially if the Pacers go out and win the title, which we can no longer rule out as a possibility, being up 1-0 on that crazy comeback win. Like, they didn't even play well and they still came out and won. And Myles Turner's he's someone that's been on the Pistons. I feel like he's like been one of those guys that's been on the Pistons radar for like a long time. And it makes a lot of sense because he is a good player. But I just it would take a lot, in my opinion, for the Pistons to be in a position to be able to bring in a mile, like, like a Myles Turner. I could see them driving up the price and being someone that, like, Turner can kind of almost use as like leverage in a way with the Pacers. But to me, the Naz Reid ones, that is the one that's more realistic to me. You're still like, you're probably not that far off from the 30 million if you go and get a Naz Reid. You're like, if you saw those alleged leaked Instagram DMs where he was talking crap with a fan, he said he's going to go out and get 100+ million this offseason, which I don't think is out of the question for Naz Reid. That was probably the most sane thing he said in that entire exchange. But so you'd probably still have to do some things to make the money work there as well. The difference is that the Pacers are actually in a really good position to bring back Myles Turner, because all it takes is going into the luxury tax. And if you're Minnesota, you have a off season of hell when you talk about the decisions that they're going to have to make, and like how they're going to have to keep, like how they're going to be able to keep things together. If they keep Naz Reid, which like I know they want to, they're not going to have a team that's going to be able to sniff getting back to the conference finals. So, and quite frankly, I just don't know if they're going to be in a position to be able to pay him that much. I mean, they just had the sale of the franchise go through too. So I think we'll learn a whole lot about like what they can actually do financially this offseason. And I don't think the answer is keeping the whole band together in Minnesota.
Yeah, I even saw a report that he wants to opt out of his player option and kind of just test the waters to see, what he could get. And I've had you on several times. I've told you, like, I feel like he'd be a fit in San Antonio. He fits anywhere personally. I think of Detroit, though, he fits like a glove, just for the fact that I know JB could really utilize him to his best of his abilities. I think we've done podcasts. You do your own podcast. Like, Pistons fans always mention getting a power forward that can shoot and, protect the rim a little bit.
Yeah.
Naz can score the basketball at all three levels. He's a really good basketball player. I think a price point for him is probably 100 million, 25 a year.
Yep.
I think he could get it. I do think he's probably the one player where I look at it, he's pretty realistic, and the Pistons can get there. They would have to move some players, in my opinion, to possibly get him. And my only pushback with him and with some fans I've been going back and forth with is he's been a bench player his whole career in Minnesota. Does he get paid and want to start? Does Tobias Harris want to take a reserve role if he's still on the roster? Let's just hypothetically, you still have Tobias and Naz on your roster. Ideally, I'd love to have a Tobias off the bench, but maybe Naz doesn't want to come off the bench. Maybe Tobias doesn't want to come off the bench. I think those are the conversations that maybe people aren't having right now. But I'd be lying to you, Sean, if I said I wouldn't like a Naz Reid on the Pistons.
I think that's one of those situations where you're like, even if that's in the air, you take Naz Reid and you figure the rest out later. I will say, if there's any person on the team or in the league that would handle that situation like with professionalism and grace, I do think it is a Tobias Harris. I do think when you just kind of look at his, just his overall demeanor and just, like how he's been embraced in Detroit and kind of the role that he has, on this team. Like, we even saw this year, like, you don't even have to look at another team. Like, look at the Pistons. Like Malik Beasley was their sixth man, but he wasn't their sixth most important man. Like he was one of the most, important players to what they were doing each and every night. So even if they brought out like Naz Reid off the bench, at least to start, or even Tobias Harris, kind of in like a 6-man role, I could almost see Tobias even kind of being like an Al Horford type guy, going forward, where it's like he's just a guy where you bring him in for whatever minutes you need, and he's able to just fill that role kind of each and every night, like no longer like as like a focal point, but as someone who's like one of like your premier role players. And to me, like if Naz is just one of those guys where if you have the opportunity to bring him in, you take that opportunity, because there's not many guys where I feel like it is a surefire like guarantee that he makes your team better. Naz Reid's one of those surefire guys to me when you look at like both sides of the ball. And I know people are like, oh, well, there was the tussle in Minnesota. Believe me, man, if those guys got in the gym and were teammates, I think Naz Reid and Ron Holland would probably get along famously.
They'd probably become best friends, honestly.
Yeah. They probably have a weird respect for each other based on the fact that they got in a tussle. Like it's bizarre how that stuff works in sports. So if he's on the table, if there's mutual interest, I think you gotta look into making that happen.